Hi, so we're Ron and Jacinta, we're the Twilight Tourists, and we're just having a little recap 6 weeks on from our Otago Rail Trail.
Yeah, it's been 6 weeks. We've been busily editing our footage from the experience, and so it's very fresh in our minds still.
Yes, it is. So we just thought we'd make a few comments, share a few hints, and give a little bit of a rating to our experience.
Yeah. So first up, we want to have a look at Tuatara Tours. I think from a ratings perspective, we should use, say, 1 to 5, 1 being bad and 5 being fantastic. So I think first up, we should think about Daryl, our guide, and how do you think we would rate his efforts?
Oh, Daryl was amazing. Just a really lovely, friendly guy, your average Kiwi bloke. He had our welfare at heart continually, especially on the second day when the weather was very inclement and in fact plunged to about 2 degrees. He was excellent, and he was good company. Daryl was always, mindful that people might need a toilet stop. Safe driver. We chatted from the back of the van to him, and felt that we got to know a little bit about him and how him and his family had fared during the earthquake. So, it was almost like meeting a new friend, really. Couldn't fault him at all.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think he was a really good Kiwi bloke. You could have a beer with him afterwards. He shared himself around. He spoke to everybody, spent time with everybody. I thought he was really good. I think in terms of a rating, I'd give him a 4.5 out of 5. Daryl, if you're watching this, the reason that I wouldn't give it a 5 is simply because we felt there was an opportunity for maybe some more commentary about the history as we were driving around. That just would have made it a little bit more complete. But aside from that, it was absolutely sensational. He was brilliant.
Yeah. 5 out of 5, Daryl, from me.
In terms of Tuatara Tours, their organisation, how would you rate that?
Yeah, it was great. Really, really good. We were collected on time from Christchurch. We, stopped for morning tea where there were thermoses and cookies.
You're right, Daryl picked us up on time. That was great. It was always very clear about what we were doing the next day, how long it would be. In terms of preparing for the trip, they sent out some useful tips. In fact, one of the things they said was make sure you take some thermals, and of course me being me decided, nah, I'm not going to need it. It's actually summer in New Zealand, and who's going to need it down there? Well, I took it anyway because they didn't take up too much room, and boy did we need it. So that'd be one of my tips actually, would be take notice of what they say. I think they were really good in terms of acknowledging any emails we sent, acknowledging the deposits, letting us know quite clearly how much we owed, in subsequent payments. And so from that perspective, I thought they were really good. Their organisation was good. And I would personally give them a 4 out of 5. I wouldn't give them a 5 because the weather was inclement one night in Lauda. We actually had dinner basically on the deck of a cafe that was exposed to, as Jacinta said, like it was 2 degrees or something. It was pretty cold. And I would have thought they should have planned to have an alternate venue if the weather turned inclement. So that's why I wouldn't give them a 5.
Yeah.
Aside from that, they were really good.
When, you know, we all love a goodies bag, and when we climbed into the van on the Saturday morning, there was a goodies bag on our seat, and in the goodies bag was a like a thermos type drink bottle, so hot or cold drinks. There was a bandana, which was a godsend, not for the first day, but certainly subsequent days, not just for the cold, but also just the wind. There was a lip balm, which was fantastic, little energy bars, protein bars, a more extensive guide to each day, which actually would have been useful to have received that prior to leaving. I'm just trying to think of all the other things. What else was in that little goodies thing? But it was...
Yeah, I think the bandana that you're talking about was actually one of those multi-purpose, kind of like a balaclava. So it can be a bandana. You can pull it over your head and up to your nose like you're robbing a bank. Or it can be pulled down and kind of act like a scarf. So, yeah, I thought that was great. So accommodation. Yeah, this is one that we've got to really rate it based on our experience. There may well be, in fact, our friends, they said they had some great rooms, and we just seemed to be a bit unlucky, I think. I thought the accommodation was okay. I looked up to actually see a rating of what a 1-star rating would be versus a 2-star rating, and the accommodation at Clyde and at Lauder wouldn't be any more than a 1 and a bit.
Yeah.
The Danzi's Pass accommodation was great, but again, it would be, you know, you'd be looking at maybe a 3. It wouldn't be any more than that. Yeah,
the accommodation at Danzi's Pass, it was like arriving at an oasis in the desert, because it had been freezing cold. It was a beautifully warm, welcoming place to arrive at. The rooms were warm, but the rooms were tiny. In fact, one of the couples said they had to stow their suitcase in the bathroom, and there wasn't a lot of room in the bathroom either. And the shower was just, although it all looked really good with the copper piping and it was an overhead shower, it was only a little bit more than a trickle. It wasn't the best, but, you know, other than that, it was the most amazing venue.
Yeah, we've actually done a full room review of the Danzi's Pass accommodation, so check that out in one of our other videos and you'll get an idea of what Jacinta's saying about space and whatnot.
Yes, the Lauder hotel was probably the least desirable.
It wasn't a hotel, it was basically some huts at a school.
The Lauder accommodation was the old schoolhouse, and we were in the detention room, and I don't know, or detention shed, I don't know if that had anything to do with it, but we didn't have any soap. And it was drafty and, yeah, kind of, 1.5.
Okay.
Made Clyde look good.
Yeah. All right. So then, in terms of meals, it's always a contentious one. We've got some photos. The meal that we had at Clyde was great in terms of volume. There was plenty of food. It was very tasty, and I think the evening meals were great. The one that let it down was the one in Lauder where I was talking about having to eat outside on a deck. But the food itself was good.
Absolutely. The lunches were wonderful. They were usually made by a local cafe. In the case of Danzi's Pass, it was made by the people at the lodge. Breakfasts were basically cereal, fruit, yogurt, toast.
Yeah, they were fine. I think possibly because the weather was pretty cold, I would have liked to have had a cooked breakfast at least on one of the days. Bacon and eggs would have gone a long way to try and keep us a little bit warm. But, it was good. And there were a couple of places where we had lunch at a cafe where they basically said you can pick from the cabinet or whatever. And so by and large, I thought the food was pretty good. I think it was probably a 4. 5, would you agree with that?
4.5, it was great. It was Tansy's Pass, the meal was absolutely exceptional. It was actually 3 courses that night. And I think also the fact that the actual atmosphere with the roaring fire and the beautiful lounge with all the trimmings of antlers and old rusty bikes and just a whole lot of memorabilia, I think, from the property, and just made it very special.
Yeah, no, it's a sensational place to while away the evening. In fact, I could have stayed there for a couple of days. So I guess the last one is value for money. I don't feel that we can score that. I think value for money is very much in the eye of the beholder. It depends on how much money you've got, what your budget is. What we tend to do as the Twilight Tourists is we always look at what is it costing us per day. The whole trip cost us $4,350 for both of us, and that's just purely what we paid Tuatara Tours. It's not airfares to get down to Christchurch or get home. It's not incidentals that we would have had in a pub or something. It is simply what we paid Tuatara Tours, and of that, we hired bikes, of course. Jacinta's electric bike was $500, and the conventional bike that I had was $200. So if you add all that together and you divide by 4, because there were 4 nights, 5 days, dividing by 4, that's $1,087 per day. So only you will know whether you think that's value for money or not. So that's really our review of Tuatara Tours. We should have another drink, honey.
I'll drink to that.
Cheers. I think if we talked about tips and tricks, I found a couple and thinking about how the trip went. I think the first thing is, if you're planning to do the Otago Rail Trail, do your research. If you happen to be looking at this video as part of that research, well, that would be great. We would be delighted to think that you're actually getting some benefit from what we did. Jacinta and I have travelled quite a bit in that part of the world, always by car before. We've always driven along. You go past pubs, you see people in lycra with bikes. The weather's normally sensational. It's the sun's out, it's hot, and they're all sitting around having a drink. And that's kind of what I thought it would be like. I expected to get on the bike, cycle for, 10 Ks, stop, have a couple of beers, get back on the bike, cycle another 10 Ks, and that kind of be it for the day. It wasn't like that at all. I think you were probably expecting to be able to stop and have a coffee or at a cafe along the way. The reality is these places are a long way away. You're in a car, you're doing, you're 20 Ks down the road in no time. It's really close. But when you're actually getting there on your own cycling power, it takes a while. So I'd just be a bit mindful of that. If you think it's a bit of a doddle, and it probably is, but there aren't a lot of opportunities to kind of sit around and sit in a beer garden and whatever. In fact, I think there was only one pub, which is at Omakau, which is near Ofur. We stopped there for lunch, not at the pub, but at the local park. and that's probably the only place that we stopped where you could have gone to a pub and had a beer and then got back on the bike and cycled on. So that's the first tip. The second one is really something that I felt, because I'm reasonably fit, but I'm not a cyclist, and I found that I spent large periods of the cycle on my own, because everybody has different fitness levels and different paces that they ride at, and if you're thinking that you'd like to, or you imagine cycling along with your partner or your friends, chatting about what you're seeing and what you're doing, I think the only way to do that, to be assured you can do that, is to get an electric bike.
Yes.
That way you've got the best chance of everybody staying together, and at least arriving at a reasonable time. And so you could stop more readily to look at things that were of interest along the trail and make up the time so that the other people in the group weren't waiting for you when you finished. So that would be my tip, is an electric bike.
And if you have a fear of heights, there's a few viaducts that are quite narrow, and just be mindful of that. Long dark tunnels also, you sort of lose a little bit of awareness, and in fact I thought I got a bit of a wobble on. I thought I might fall off because I lost one of my senses, being sight. I managed to stay up, so that was good, but these are just little things. Daryl did explain they had one guy who, when he struck his first bridge, and there's lots of bridges, he just froze and actually had to be coaxed across all the bridges because of his fear of heights. So that's another factor to consider.
Yeah, that's in fact another item that they had in the goodie bag was a torch. Yes. And I kind of thought, well, what do I need a torch for? And you do need it, because when you get into those tunnels, and some of them are pretty long, as you'll see in some of our other videos, there isn't any light in there. It's completely black. And
the light on the bike really isn't sufficient. I found it didn't really help at all.
Did you have a light on your bike?
Yes, I did.
Oh, I didn't have one on mine.
Okay, wow, you see, you have to have an electric bike.
Right, okay. So that's kind of it, I think, for tips and tricks.
Oh, yes, padded pants. We went into Kathmandu, or one of those type places, and a woman, they didn't have much stock, and she said, oh no, you don't need that, just get a padded seat, which we purchased. And we found out, in fact, you do need padded pants, and the seats were, well, as the guy from Tuatara Tours explained on the email, you'll find the seats as comfortable as your favourite lounge chair. Well, that might be a bit of a stretch. However, the padded pants were a godsend, and we couldn't have done it without them.
Well, we probably could have, but it wouldn't have been anywhere near as comfortable.
So another point to consider is your start and end points.
Yeah, I think that's a good one. You'll see in our earlier videos that it took us about 8 hours with stops to go all the way from Christchurch to Clyde. The reality is, though, that the scenery there is beautiful. You do see some spectacular sights, as we've shown in our earlier videos. I think more importantly is to consider, when you finish at Middlemarch, you're pretty tired. And it takes 4 3/4 hours, I think it is, to get from Middlemarch back to Christchurch. If we were to do it again, I think we would seriously consider leaving the tour at Middlemarch and making our own way either to Dunedin, which is about an hour away, or in fact going from Middlemarch to Queenstown, which is 2 3/4 hours away. Now, either way, both those destinations are closer than going all the way back to Christchurch. And they're central hubs, so you can catch flights anywhere in New Zealand, and in fact even overseas from Queenstown. So it may well be worth organising transport to go from Middlemarch to Dunedin or to Queenstown, because it would certainly save you an extra night's accommodation. and you wouldn't have the problem or the fatigue of driving all that way back.
Well, obviously we didn't have to drive, but Daryl himself was quite tired. And I'm waffling now, aren't
You
I?
are waffling. So that's kind of it, other than how would you rate your experience or our experience on the Otago Rail Trail?
Yeah, I'm glad I did it. I wouldn't be rushing out to book another rail trail or bike trail anytime soon, unless it was more at a sedentary pace where you could stop and have a coffee along the way. And to be quite honest, it's quite remote in parts. If you come to a place on the map, quite often there might only be a pub or a tin shed. There's not a lot around, and a lot of the scenery is very much the same. So, it can get a little bit monotonous at times. The other thing I found is not being, not having done cycling for some time, and certainly not on a trail, when it's windy or when there's quite a deep covering of gravel, you've really got to look down to concentrate, because you could easily go into a bit of a dip. So that's another thing that I feel you miss some of the scenery because the fact that you're looking down and you're concentrating.
Yeah, I mean, I would say hats off to the people that maintain the Otago Rail Trail itself. It's pretty good. There is, as you say, there is parts where there's a lot of gravel, but that's because they're maintaining it. So, the trail's good, the bridges are good. Yeah, they're high, but they're not in any way unsafe. So from that perspective, I think it's fine. I think the facts of the matter is it's a trail that was originally a railway. Now, trains don't like hills. They like inclines, and there are quite a few of those. And trains also don't like corners. So there are lots and lots and lots of straights that go at some places. Those straights will go for a couple of kilometres, if not more. And so from that perspective, it can be a little monotonous, maybe even boring. I'd say that's a personal opinion, that's influenced by us because we're not cyclists. So you need to take that, I guess,
into account. Yeah, I'd say that the last leg, which I think was 27 kilometres from Hyde to Middlemarch, on the last day, seemed like the longest trek that we did because it was virtually straight the whole way.
Yeah, it was slightly downhill, so it was very fast. Well, it was fast-ish. But yeah, it was just dead straight. We just went for a long way. And that becomes, it becomes a bit wearing over time. And so it can be, I think, fairly described as boring. I think part of the trick to understanding where we're coming from as far as our comments about the trail, if you have a look at these pictures, don't look at the people in the foreground, have a look at the background. And what you'll see is long straights and scenery that is okay, nothing spectacular. Not like the scenery that we saw and have documented in our first video, the introduction to the Otago Rail Trail. That's some spectacular scenery.
And I think too, grey, cold, overcast days don't make for a brilliant picture. I think if it had been clear blue skies, you would have seen the contrast with all the golds and the greys and the blacks and tussock and all the things that we passed. So
okay,
sums it
so
up.
thanks for watching. We hope that's been of some help and some interest. If you want to see how we came to that conclusion, please have a look at these videos here, and that will show you in more detail some of the points that we've made.